when the legacy media institutions aren't paying attention, we can make a lot of hay and potentially change the outcome of an election. Like, I don't know if Glenn Youngkin gets elected if some of my friends don't write the stories that they do, but we need to learn how to create good enough products, right? We need to learn to address the talent gap in journalism so that when we're playing in the same pond as the New York Times or Politico or Punchbowl, when we're talking about Capitol Hill, that we can actually compete.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim. I am the COO of American Moment, and we have a fantastic guest with us this week. But first, before I get to that, I want to drag your attention over to American Moment's website, americanmoment.org. There you can find all kinds of cool things from our fellowship program for the fall. The applications for that are still live. Get paid $3,000 a month to come and get your career started in DC. It's going to be a fantastic program. We really hope to see you there. You can also find information about our programs that are going on this summer that are still open. The Foundations of American Statecraft program, which is a training program for people who already have internships in DC, and then AM Fridays, which is our Friday lunch seminars that we do in one of the Senate buildings here in DC. We have great speakers like Elbridge Colby, Will Ruger, Mark Krikorian, Stephen Miller, etc. It's really a fantastic time, and we do free Chick-fil-A lunch. So if you're an intern who would love to check that out, or if you manage a lot of interns who would love to check that out, please feel free to sign up for that on our website or reach out to me directly at nick@americanmoment.org. So today we had on a very good friend of mine, Bradley Devlin from the American Conservative, who is out with this new piece about Appalachia. We talked about that. We talked about basically the conservative fake news media, why conservative journalism is so bad. And then in the bonus section, we talked about Bradley's doomsday predictions and my new favorite hobby horse, Formula One. When Sarab is away, it's time for sports. So we talked about that. We had a great time. Again, please go to americanmoment.org to see all the things that we're up to. As a reminder, we do have a membership program now on YouTube. You can find that on our YouTube page. You can become a truther or a statesman to get extra access to our content and access to the episode a day early on Sunday. We will go now to Bradley Devlin. Bradley, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, you know, as an avid listener of the show, but not as a subscriber, I found out, which we need to make sure to get fixed betrayal. For you. Yes, this is a great portrayal of our friendship. But you know how we start the show. Tell us about yourself and how you got where you are today at the American Conservative.
Yeah, maybe I can repair that burned bridge by saying the reason I'm at the American Conservative is because of American Moment.
There we go. You can have a free subscription.
Yeah, there we go. No, I started out at UC Berkeley as one of the college Republicans there and became the secretary and then president of that organization. And that was, of course, in the fall of 2016 when I entered UC Berkeley. So they had this giant projector screen set up. They were ready to celebrate the glass ceiling finally breaking, and Trump wins, which was glorious for all of us sitting there, just in the fraternity house, just fist pumping kind of under the table, watching the election results come in. And from there, of course, there's the Milo riots in February of 2017, which I was a part of, not as a rioter, but as someone who was locked in the student union building. Actually, if you look back at the old Fox News helicopter shots, there's like a chyron that's like Berkeley burning to the ground. And the entire floor, ground outside of the building, you have Black Bloc Antifa rioters trying to take the guardrails and shove them through the glass windows. And on the second floor, you see kind of where the ballroom is, and there's two figures, just two little silhouettes, standing there looking out at all the craziness going on. That's like me and one of my best buddies from college just videotaping it, being like, what's going on? I can't believe this is happening to us. And kind of overnight, you become the spearhead. Our group became the spearhead of the new free speech movement on college campuses. So from there, we kind of rode that momentum in bringing a number of conservative speakers to campus. We tried to bring Ann Coulter. We tried to bring Dan Horowitz. We tried to bring Dave Horowitz. We tried to bring Ben Shapiro, and we successfully brought Ben Shapiro. But all of those were stymied by the administration and ended up being a part of a lawsuit that we had against UC Berkeley for creating arbitrary restrictions on our First and 14th Amendment rights. And in this time, I started writing columns for the Daily Wire about what was going on the ground in the lead up to Ben Shapiro's talk, and started working for other outlets on a contributor basis. And once I graduated, it was in the spring of 2020. So COVID had everything shut down. I had finished college, in my living room. So that was the most anticlimactic end to a crazy 4 years on Berkeley's college campus.
Yeah.
But I kind of looked at the landscape. No one on the Hill was hiring. Few people were hiring in that kind of election environment. The Trump campaign was. I felt bearish on our chances. And so I decided I was going to go to the Daily Caller. I worked as an analysis reporter there for a year. And then it came time for me to move on. I wanted to go somewhere that had fundamentally changed my politics. Through these columns, I kind of branched out into on-the-ground reporting from a conservative student perspective to more opinions, more columns. And I wanted to go do that again. Analysis reporting kind of scratched that itch, but I wanted to go to a place that was engaged in activist journalism, that was engaged in the fight. And that was the American Conservative. And funny enough, Sarab emails me one day and he says, hey, would you be interested in going to the American Conservative? And this was a publication that I found as I grappled with the questions of how has the right gone so wrong? And luckily, Pat Buchanan has a book explaining exactly that, where the right went wrong. Found that book. I found probably the only conservative publication that was right on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Pentagon Papers, the Afghan Papers really revealed that so clearly. And so as I'm going through this political transformation, I want to go to the American Conservative. Sarab emails me and says, hey, there's an opening. It's an operations position, though. I said, that's fine. I kind of want to get out of writing for the moment. I want to go do something on the business side. I've done journalism for a while now. I've realized there's not a lot of money in it. And if I want to get married and have a family, I better start making money and saving money. So I interview for this operations position at the American Conservative with our former executive director, Emil Doak. At some point, Emil just looks at me and goes, you're not an operations guy. You're not an operator. You're a writer. You're a writer. You're clearly passionate about writing still. Give me a few months. There will be a spot at the American Conservative for writing, as they were in kind of a period of transition on their editorial side of things. And so a mutual friend of American Moment, Colin Pruitt, ended up getting the job as the operations guy. And a few months later, Emil said, hey, it's time. Come in, talk to Helen and Micah, two former guests of the podcast, and let's see if this is a good fit. It was. I've been there ever since, September of 2021. So I was joining just as the war in Afghanistan was coming to a close.
Right.
And so I sit there and I go, awesome, I'm the staff reporter at the American Conservative, and our issues have been foreign policy this entire time. We've won, right? The right has realized that wars in the Middle East were a folly, that nation building was a folly, and now I get to transition into other topics that are really related to foreign policy, but actually matter more to the everyday lives of Americans. And that was immigration and trade. Super excited.
And then February 2022 happened.
Right. And then in November, I write my first story talking about all these troop movements around the borders of Ukraine in Russia. And I write about Biden administration's response. And of course, in February 2022, we are once again embroiled in a foreign conflict. And then, of course, on October 7th, we became involved in yet another war in the Middle East. So my job has been more foreign policy related than I would have liked it to be, because it was like, oh, we won. It's like, well, I guess you just have to keep reminding the swamp of this over and over and over again. So I went from the staff reporter, now I'm the political editor, and I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none at this point, where I write about foreign policy, I write about the day-to-day on the Hill, I write about cultural decay in this country, and just some guy sitting in an office in Washington, D.C. might not have all the answers, but I have a few solutions maybe that I can offer to the conversation, and so I try to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, while we're on that topic, talking about this kind of transition you've had in conservative media and your career path, we get a lot of people that apply, whether it's to the fellowship or just some of our other programming. We meet a lot of people that really want to get involved in journalism. It's really, really what they want to do. And I've had this sneaking suspicion for a long time that what they want to do is not actually journalism. It's that they want to write hot takes, basically, for some outlet, and just write about their opinions, as a young person fresh out of college. What do you think is wrong? We're talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but what do you think is wrong with the state of conservative media outside of the American Conservative, right? Which
does nothing wrong.
The best publication in DC for what it's worth. But what else do you think is going wrong out there?
Yeah. First, I'd like to just address the fellows who come to you with that. Those jobs shouldn't exist in right-wing journalism. And it's actually not good and not healthy for you to be publishing 5 to 10 hot takes.
If you want to do that direct to camera, it's right there. Just look at them.
It's not worth it. It's a soul-sucking exercise to publish 5 to 10 opinions every single week. You shouldn't have that many opinions. You're a 22-year-old. That's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it made me unemployable when I went and looked for the few jobs available on Capitol Hill when I was graduating college, right?
Yeah.
Is a senator going to take a flyer on this kid who's a loudmouth and been in public, been in public debates? Probably not. They want someone who's not necessarily rigid, who has views but is not dead set on an ideology or an agenda. They want people who are willing to learn. Because no matter how much you know about politics or philosophy or history, you're going to get into the process of day-to-day government, and you're going to realize that, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I didn't understand. And I've been really lucky to have really good mentors who've kind of taught me that, even though I've never had a position on Capitol Hill, right? Because you have to think about, you might understand these issues from a public policy perspective or from a philosophical perspective, but you don't understand that once you get on the Hill, you're dealing with 535 personalities at least, right? And those are just the people who have the votes. Then you have their staffs, and you have their apparatuses, and then you have the executive branch, which you guys crunch the numbers on that,
right?
15,000 folks that you need to figure out who to talk to, how to navigate. And of course, the big guy who lives on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And so it's not good for young journalists to actually get involved there. They should probably try to either go into straight reporting and try to revive that kind of working class mentality of journalism and get on the Hill and talk to those people instead of writing from their home offices or from their couches. And so opinion journalism is something that you should be able to develop over time. Mm-hmm. It's not something that you should aim to go straight into. Micah told me this as I was just joining the American Conservative team. It's every good journalist or writer in this space typically finds 2 or 3 things that they can really add to the conversation. And when you find those 2 or 3 things, it's going to be immensely gratifying for you. But don't expect every piece you write or everything that you say to be world changing.
Right.
So you have to do a lot of soul searching and a lot of work to find that. In terms of like where the right went wrong in journalism, it's kind of the same story with unions or with other industries or other areas that we look in the political movement. And it's like, we just decided that we were going to stop playing ball. Like we decided that we weren't going to play ball with the unions anymore. And then the unions became hives of left-wing scum and villainy. That's a sad thing. Like, some unions are actually good and we should support the workers because those workers are actually our base. But we decided we weren't going to fight in those spaces, and we decided that we weren't going to fight for control over our media, like our legacy institutions in media. So we then turn, to digital media, and we have a lot of really good outlets that do really good work, but a lot of the work that we do is journalism, right? Just as much copy as you can get out as possible, which most other places just do it via Newswire. And we do man on the street videos that have an impact, but we're not nearly as good at doing it as comedians.
Right.
And we have cheap opinion columns that don't actually move the ball in any way, shape, or form. The only way that conservative journalists move the ball is when we are playing in a pond that the big guys decided that they don't want to play in, or they just want to downplay or ignore. And that was the case with Loudoun County and the school board fight, where like when the legacy media institutions aren't paying attention, we can make a lot of hay and potentially change the outcome of an election. Like, I don't know if Glenn Youngkin gets elected if some of my friends don't write the stories that they do, but we need to learn how to create good enough products, right? We need to learn to address the talent gap in journalism so that when we're playing in the same pond as the New York Times or Politico or Punchbowl, when we're talking about Capitol Hill, that we can actually compete, right? Like, it infuriates me every day when I see clearly planted scoops from Republican and conservative legislators in Punchbowl and Politico. They hate you. Stop bringing your stories there. Like, the American Conservative is a 501c3 and we exist for a reason. Like, we have conservative priors and we can understand these issues if you work with us. But since the structural forces in conservative journalism has taken us away from that kind of real reporting, conservative legislators don't want to come to us. Like, they know that even though Politico hates them, like, they understand how to run a tight ship. And this is not, a comment about any former employer or anyone in particular. It's just, I think the institutional forces and the industry forces in right-wing media need to fundamentally change if we want to be able to move the ball.
Yeah. Do you think that the biggest motivation on this side is just like, because it's so hard to make money in digital journalism, ergo they're just chasing clicks? Like, is that the deal, or is there some other kind of perverse incentive structure driving, that kind of journalism?
Well, like, how many conservative journalists actually go to J school? Like, yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know really anyone who went to a J school in conservative journalism right now. So you're starting off with these kids coming out of college. They don't actually know how to become journalists. That's a huge problem. And you see like Emily Jasinski over at the NJC trying to address that by talking about the history of American journalism. But there's like a real lack of concrete skills in the industry on our side. And so I think, we have the digital media model that has shown itself to be a failure, right? Like, we can't just get enough revenue from digital ads to make a publication succeed. It needs to be paired with some sort of subscription model. But the only way that you're going to actually get subscription is if you have good enough story where people want to pay and get behind the paywall.
Right.
That's a huge problem. So you have a personnel apparatus that is still geared towards the digital media age, even when the digital media age is collapsing all around them. And so how do we take young journalists, including myself, and give them the requisite skills to create, to do the type of journalism that needs to be done.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it really is a catch-22. Like, I don't know if we should be telling students to go into J school because we might lose them. But if they don't go to J school, we need to have something to train them. Like, I still struggle with FOIAs. Like,
right.
I've been in this game for a long time. Like,
FOIAs are hard.
FOIAs are hard, but like, I should know how to do FOIAs really, really well at this point, and I just simply don't. And it's a lack of skills on my own side, and like, I have to be constantly cognizant.
Skill issue.
Yeah, like, I have to be constantly cognizant of like, what am I missing here? I don't have a lot of contact with the left because I work for the American Conservative, and like, that means that 50%, a little over, right, or a little under, depending on the government, means that I don't have access to like 50% of what's going on. Right. So like, I either need to really solidify my access with the 50% that I do have, or I need to find ways where I can like work with Ro Khanna's office. Yeah. Right. And some of these people are actually willing to work with you. Like, as I keep tabs on this FISA fight, like, I want to get in touch with Representative Lofgren from California, who's a progressive Democrat, but she's working with Warren Davidson on amendments to this FISA package that are to include warrant provisions, right? Like, if the FBI wants to use FISA to surveil American citizens, like, there needs to be a warrant process for that. Okay, so like, that's an issue where we can actually go across the aisle. The increased conservative skepticism from people like Matt Gaetz about the war in Yemen, right? Like, that's a place where you can actually work with people like AOC or Ro Khanna. So yeah, you need to figure out how to do that too. Yeah,
that's all very interesting. Sorry to get sidetracked on the journalism. I find all this stuff so fascinating.
Part of the reason I think that we opened with this is that I was talking to your fellows about this just last week, about, the different structural forces at play that have been in place since the beginning of the media crazed American nation. Like,
right.
We have been a media crazed nation since before the Constitution. Right. Mm-hmm. Since the colonial period.
Back when it was pamphlets.
Yeah. And back when it was the penny press, which came later, obviously. But back when Benjamin Franklin was like the first American elite to have grand designs of a media empire, right? Like, he was the first person who wanted to be Rupert Murdoch, even though Rupert Murdoch's not American. I'm not going to say. But like, he was the first like American elite, long before, the Hearsts to have these types of ambitions. And so you need to understand like the constant tensions between access and accountability. You need to understand the forces of decentralization and centralization at play in the media environment right now. And those forces of decentralization and centralization, I think, are really what define our moment right now.
Yeah.
Because we have a media environment, and it was like more clear back in, let's see, what era do I want to choose? It was very clear in the early Republic with just how involved the political parties were with individual publications, right? When you picked up a copy of the blank Gazette in your hometown, you knew that it was affiliated with the Whigs or the Federalists or the Democratic Republicans, right? You knew that going in. And so you end up in a media environment that is very centralized, right? Very attached to the political process, owned and shaped in a lot of ways by political parties. And in knowing that, you engage with the media environment thinking like, I'm reading the words of insert politician here. Let's just say I'm reading the words of Hamilton, even though Hamilton's probably writing under a pseudonym. But I know that this is not Hamilton trying to lie to me. This is Hamilton entering a political dialogue with the demos, right? That making the demos more politically involved and active and cognizant of like the actual party forces means that the demos is more prepared to hold these people accountable when elections come around, right? And then you move into the age of yellow journalism, where that becomes just so over sensationalized that it appeals more to the base desires of the demos rather than, a political conversation that uplifts.
Right.
that was a very centralized time. Today, we find ourselves in a very centralized time, but the media environment presents itself as decentralized, right? Andy Ngo, for example, Barry Weiss left the New York Times. In any other era in American history, since its founding in 1851, like that kind of thing was unthinkable. Like, I'm going to leave the New York Times and do my own independent thing and succeed. That's crazy. Sagar and Jetty and Crystal have done this too, with leaving the Hill and starting their own independent thing in Breaking Points. And so all of these case examples seem to say, oh, we live in a decentralized media environment. But when you get down to it, there's 5 major corporations that dominate the media landscape, right? News executives, there's a study by Pew that was done in kind of the mid-teens of this century, of course, that talked about there's like 237 media executives that control like 95% of Americans' appetite in the media landscape. And so like per executive oversees a population the size of San Francisco, just something like mind-boggling. Mm-hmm. And then you incorporate the tech side, right? The only reason that it presents as decentralized is because a lot of this is happening on social media. And so a guy with a phone and a willingness to buy a plane ticket to go to Kenosha and see what's going on can publish videos and like get really important information out there when the major media networks are deciding they're going to say fiery but mostly peaceful, right? Oh, fiery and not so peaceful, says the guy with the flip phone who decided he was going to buy a ticket and go to Kenosha.
Yeah.
But even the tech spaces, right? It's an oligarchy. So you have a hyper-centralized media environment that presents as decentralized. And the only way that I think we can get out of that is by, one, building institutions that can actually play in a centralized environment, and at the same time, empowering the decentralized elements as best as we can.
Right. Like the American Conservative.
Like the American Conservative.
Exactly right.
That's right.
So speaking of the American Conservative, you have a very interesting piece set to come out shortly, which I've gotten to read an embargoed version of, and we get to record it and talk about it before it comes out. So you write this big piece on Appalachia. Tell us about it. Tell someone who lives in Appalachia. Tell me about it.
Well, and that's why I'm so excited to be doing this with you, and like being able to talk about this long form is that you moved there and you're living this every day. West Virginia is the only state, right? There's 13 states that are in the Appalachian region or considered Appalachian. West Virginia is the only one in which every single county is registered as an Appalachian county, according to the Appalachian Regional Commission. So it is, central Appalachia. When we're talking about Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, I mean, that is Appalachia. That is like the purest form. Great poet James Stills of the region said it's Appalachia is kind of a mythical region, but at the same time, the heart of it's found in Eastern Kentucky. Right. And that's where I went for this story. I went to Leslie County, Kentucky. It wasn't me just traveling by myself, though. I was blessed to go to a great Lutheran high school in Orange County, California. And goodness, about a decade and a half ago, they had a mission trip. They have a mission program there, which is fantastic. And all the people there do amazing work. They had a mission trip planned for Mexico, and they had to cancel it on short notice because of safety concerns. And so Orange Lutheran Missions folks are looking up places that they could go instead. And they find this place called Big Creek Missions in Bear Branch, Kentucky, which is in the heart of Leslie County. And Big Creek Missions is a interdenominational Christian ministry. It's an old middle school that's been converted to like every classroom has like 6 to 8 triple bunk beds. Everyone just piles in, sleeping bags, the whole nine. I mean, you're with high school students. Everything's chaos.
Bet it smells crazy in there.
It do smell crazy in there. And so you go out there for a week and you serve. And so from February to November, Kevin Rogers, who heads up Big Creek Missions, has groups coming in and out, serving the community of Leslie, of Perry, of Harlan, and the surrounding counties. And so as a high school junior and senior, in 2014 and then 2015. Yeah, 2014 and 2015, I was able to go on this mission trip. And, I'm a Southern California beach kid. If you can't tell by like the striped linen shirt. And
by like everything about
by like
you.
everything about me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like all I'd known was, a fairly middle upper class town. I'd drive my truck to work with the fins and the boogie board in the back. And once we got out of class and we had a free period at like 1:30, it was like we all piled in the truck and went to the beach. Like that's just what we did. And so going there as a high school junior and senior, I was presented with a lot of questions that I had never really fully considered because I just had never seen this side of America, an America that was really struggling financially, an America that, doesn't have homeless people on every corner like you see in cities now, but homelessness is in the form of couch surfing and struggling to find relatives to stay with. Drugs. I mean, just the amount of drug abuse is mind-boggling. And so, I started asking myself really naive but simple questions. I mean, I'm a 16-year-old boy at this point. How did Appalachia get left so far behind? Who made this happen? Why was it allowed to happen in the first place? And between my junior and senior trip, one Donald Trump came down an escalator and declared that the American dream was dead. And that was something that Appalachians had known for decades. Appalachians are the most patriotic people in this country. They're not condemning their country when they say the American dream is dead. But because they love their country, they want to save it and they want to be real and authentic about the problems that faces their community and the problems that face our nation. So when Trump started talking about protectionism and saying that free trade agreements had undermined the ability of workers to get good jobs that had good benefits, they had thought that for decades. When Trump came out and said foreign wars had been a massive drain on the public fisc and cost thousands of lives of our American sons and daughters, they knew that because most of the kids who grew up in a very impoverished place in Appalachia found the only way that they can try to get out of poverty was go and join the armed forces. So they had really high casualty and mortality rates in Appalachia and places like Leslie, Kentucky, from the wars on terror. Like the ARC, the Appalachian Regional Commission, left like they put out data reports. And it's just tons and tons of charts and tables showing, each county in Appalachia and just how concentrated a particular issue is. And it covers everything from poverty to veterans to who has healthcare and so on and so forth. Veteran rates are incredibly high in Appalachia. When Trump started talking about immigration as not only a economic problem, but a cultural problem, they saw that, they believed that. They saw the effects of low-wage labor and offshoring in their pocketbooks every single day. And so much of the realignment that we have in Washington, D.C. right now that started with Trump was something that Appalachians had intuited for decades. And this is like the deepest red part of the nation, right? This is the people, these are the people who were our base the entire time, and we refused to speak to them. And so I think we've learned a lot of lessons from these people, even though when you go there and you talk to them, they couldn't tell you who, they couldn't tell you who Sauger is. They couldn't tell you who Orrin Cass is. They couldn't tell you who Ryan Girdusky is. But they know something is kind of happening in Washington. But
they do know who Tucker Carlson is.
They do know who Tucker Carlson is, and they love talking to me about Tucker. But hey, come up to me, have you seen what Tucker Carlson said about this? I'm like, I have indeed. He's like, I actually worked for the Daily Caller, which is a media organization that he started. So you know Tucker Carlson? Can I give him a phone call? I was like, I don't know him that well, guys. No, not like that. Not like that.
I got to sit in the studio one time.
That's right. Yeah, I went on his show one time.
My wife did it too.
Yeah,
We've
exactly.
all been there.
Yeah, exactly. But lost my train of thought. Anyway, they kind of like intuit something is happening in Washington, and they're very happy that it is. But like at the end of the day, they don't care. And if revival comes to Appalachia through what I think would be a number of prudent policies enacted in Washington, D.C., and like just more attention on what our voters actually want. Like, don't expect them to come thanking the GOP or to thank institutional Washington. They'd be like, yeah, thank you, sarcastically, because
it's about damn time.
Yeah, it's about damn time. and you know, all the thanks and all the glory is going to be to God and the people who started nonprofits like Kevin Rogers at Big Creek Missions, who made sure that these communities could survive amidst, you know, crazy cycles of boom and bust, whether it's the timber industry or manufacturing or coal.
Yeah. So you've done something that a bunch of pointy-headed dorks in DC refuse to do, both on the right and the left, which is actually go to Appalachia and spend some time there investigating what's going on and what the cause of it is. So let's talk about that. Why did Appalachia get left behind, and who did it to them?
Yeah. First off, I should qualify. I guess I didn't even get to that part in my previous rant, but I went there as a junior and senior, and then I came back. I went back to Appalachia in November of last year. So my little sister, who is much younger than me, is now a freshman in Orange Lutheran. She went on the trip, and so I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like, I had this understanding of what Appalachia was and what it was recognizing in 2014 and 2015. Now I get a return after the realignment is kind of in the stage of maturation, after the first term of Trump's presidency, after COVID and a radical social change. And I get to see like where these forgotten people are now and what they think and how they feel. How it got this way, lack of attention, a lack of attention from our elites, specifically elites among the right, who understand that we need to play ball with these kind of industries that work in Appalachia, such as mining and timber and manufacturing. Most with energy industries, right? Like Sarab has a great speech that she gave at NatCon, and I'd encourage people to go watch it. Like, the right has always been able to approach the energy industry with clear eyes and actually play ball with them. But sometimes we're a little too cozy, obviously. That's been proven true with all the free trade agreements that we've sought, right? Oh, we're going to make it cheaper for industries, for American companies, even though we know we're sacrificing American workers, right? They're going to go elsewhere. Right. When we play too cozy with those industries, it leads to systems of abuse, and it also alienates people from our base who start to gravitate elsewhere politically. Like, if you're not delivering for them, they are not afraid to leave. And so in 1965, when President Johnson creates the Appalachian Regional Commission, it turns Appalachian development into a matter of like capital P progress, that we're only going to pay attention to the material conditions. We'll fiddle with the numbers to make sure that the material conditions seem like they're constantly improving. We're going to partner with some local and state and municipal governments to flood the zone with cash, but mostly in the form of block grants with like fairly radical NGOs operating in the area. And the right has decided they're not going to pay attention to this issue, so now we own it. Yeah. And no surprise, when Leslie County, one of the most Republican places in the nation, it has never voted for a Democratic presidential candidate in its history. It was created in 1878, has never voted for a Democratic president. It was the most Republican county in 1892. It was again in 1908. It was again in 1916. From like 1892 to 1928, not a single Democratic presidential candidate managed to get more than 10% of the vote in Leslie County, Kentucky. Fast forward to the Johnson administration. Johnson did not win Appalachia, but Kennedy, Johnson creates the Appalachian Regional Commission because Kennedy started to prioritize Appalachia and wanted to do something about it. Obviously, Kennedy's killed by the CIA, and then
and so on.
So
the story goes.
Yeah, I guess they didn't want him doing anything about Appalachia. But Johnson decides to continue that program, and because of the foundation that Kennedy lays, Johnson, in his landslide defeat of Barry Goldwater, wins 47% of Leslie County, Kentucky. And so while it was not enough to eventually carry places like Leslie, when you're dealing with our electoral system, Democrats basically just need to be as competitive as possible in rural areas like Eastern Kentucky and run up the numbers in urban areas, right? So that was enough for Johnson and for Democrats that would follow him to like actually be fairly competitive in Appalachian states, not just Kentucky, but up and down the Appalachian region, right? Pennsylvania has a lot of Appalachian counties, Georgia as well. So since the Johnson administration until, really Mitt Romney in 2012, Democrats are averaging somewhere between 25 and 35% of the vote in a place like Leslie, Kentucky. Things were going so poorly with the Obama administration. The Obama administration was so keen on green energy, so keen on basically destroying all of the various industries that actually provide Appalachia with a little bit of hope, that Mitt Romney gets a massive amount of Leslie County votes, something like 89%, and Obama gets less than 10% in 2012. Donald Trump performs just as well as Mitt Romney in 2016 and 2012. But the Republican candidates like Bob Dole, like George W. Bush, like John McCain, who really do epitomize the like neoliberal libertarian takeover of the right in the late 20th, early 21st century, are among some of the poorest performers in places like Leslie County, Kentucky.
Interesting.
Yeah. So all that is to say, like, these people aren't afraid to move away from the GOP if we don't decide to play ball with them. And that's good. Like, you want your base activated enough to say, like, I'm willing to walk away from this negotiation that you and I have right now.
How about I just don't vote for you?
Right. It creates accountability. And especially as someone who works in journalism, like, I want accountability on the right. Yeah. You guys want accountability on the right. I think a lot of the best conservative lawmakers that we have constantly complain about the lack of accountability that we have on the right. Forgetting to play ball with our base is how Appalachia got left behind. And so the Democrats came in with a capital P progress agenda and decided that it was just a matter of materialism, and we're not going to address any of the cultural rot that was happening in Appalachia at the time, when you're talking about drug overdoses, which is a more recent phenomenon, but, children out of wedlock, divorce, all of the
alcohol abuse,
all of the cultural metrics that, people like Tim Carney lay out and why these places are dying is exactly the types of issues that a welfare state program is not addressing fully. And the right, which should have this more comprehensive, holistic view of politics, can come in and do something about that. And I think we're waking up to that fact a little too late, but we're still waking up to it.
Yeah. So why do you think, the progressive left has kind of taken on this aura of like, we are the bulwark saving like poors in America, like poor people. That's like our whole thing. Why do they only care about poor people in urban areas and not in rural areas like Appalachia?
Look at the numbers, right? Like, poor people in urban centers vote democratically, religiously. Not the case in places like Leslie County, Kentucky, right? Because at the end of the day, even Johnson wasn't able to carry Leslie County, Kentucky because they realized that they don't actually share any cultural values with these elites. Now, Johnson was a Texas man, a little bit different than some of the coastal elites that dominate the Democratic Party now. But that's really what I think is behind it, is that it's a matter of electoral politics. 1, 2, it's just easier to control and distribute a welfare state society in a heavily urbanized setting, right? Like, we talk about a parallel to this, which is like ballot harvesting or get out the vote efforts. Like, if Republicans want to have get out the vote efforts, it means going to rural areas and driving 10 minutes between each house to talk to voters and say, hey, like, you really should get out to vote for President Donald Trump. In downtown Atlanta, like 3 Democratic operatives go to a apartment complex and talk to 1,000 voters in the time it takes for us to talk to 100, right? Same thing remains true with welfare programs. Like, yes, of course, there's some added confusion and some added difficulty with just the amount of people that you're having to deal with, but you're in a very centralized geographic area. And so that makes, that's why they want to keep pushing people into cities. I think it's easier to control. And the other part of the equation is just the left hates religious Christians. Like, they just hate evangelicals.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was kind of calling to mind like the basket of deplorables.
Yeah, and actually there's like a big scholarly debate over the region of whether or not Appalachia is even real. Like, Appalachia.
Fact check, is Appalachia real?
No, exactly. Like, there's tons of scholarly articles specifically that like emerged in the 70s as this era of capital P progressivism is making its way through the region. Not like taking hold of voters, but just like, is the government's approach, right? Like, this is just a distribution problem. Like, we just like flood the zone with cash and it'll be all fine. Some folks in the 1970s and since then have suggested that this is just like a mythical region that we've created that is based on late 19th century writers' opinions of Appalachia from like the coastal elite north. I think that's completely incorrect. And
yeah, the reason, super interesting.
Yeah, and like the reason that they say so is like, I'm not in any way suggesting that Appalachia is culturally homogenous. Like, it covers from New York to like northeastern Mississippi, but there are like certain central tenets that have undergirded the Appalachian way of life, right? Like this like yeoman mindset, this like Jacksonian type of populism, cultural Christianity, right? Like, all of those things have dominated this geographic area for so long.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why like late 19th century writers who came to Appalachia and started studying it and looking at it went back home and said like, yeah, these are a homogenous people. Why? Because the people themselves looked at their region and their culture and said like, yeah, like, we're all backwoodsmen. We're all Cohees, or Cohees, right? And Cohee is a like slang term for an Appalachian that came about in the mid 19th century, if I'm remembering correctly. And it means, it's actually a Scotch-Irish twisting of quoth he, right? Like the old English quoth he. They just turned it into Cohee. And so like they all identified one another as backwoodsmen, as Cohee, as Appalachian, as mountaineers. And people were observing that. It wasn't that coastal elites were just imposing this on them.
Well, and almost all these people like were Scots-Irish. Like in West Virginia, it's like, all the mountain folk are like all Scots-Irish, and then the Italians are like over there on the other side of the hill. That's always been my impression,
right?
Anyway,
and there's a reason why, like, this all comes about in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. This like Appalachia is fake narrative.
Yeah. Appalachia is fake and gay.
Yeah, definitely not gay. They are trying to say that though now. Like this whole like, there's a book called like Queering Appalachia, and then there's a response to
surely that's a government funded NGO.
Yeah, and there's like a response from like this lesbian who has a PhD from like nowhere state about the history of Appalachia. And her book's okay, but it's like, she's like, this is the most devastating rebuke of hillbilly elegy ever. Like, why doesn't J.D. Vance talk more about black people in Appalachia? It's like, I don't think J.D. Vance is ignoring black people in Appalachia. It's just like, it's a memoir. Like,
yeah, J.D. Vance is not black.
Breaking news, J.D. Vance is not black. I'm sorry. I really hope that's clipped, by the way. Just like send that clip to me. Send that clip to me. That's the intro, actually. That's the intro clip when you like play a little snippet and it's just breaking news.
Jake might end up cutting it. I don't know. We'll see.
But like, there's this whole, cultural cultural progressive narrative that is now trying to fill in this Appalachia is a myth narrative. But there's a reason why in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, when Appalachians are going north in droves to find manufacturing work after manufacturing and mining and timber industries are dying in Appalachia, right? They take the hillbilly highway up north. 3 million Appalachians in that period of time, or 3 million Appalachians in the 50s leave the region, and they go north to find work in places like Cincinnati and Cleveland and Columbus and Detroit. And when they get there, what do? Like, they're all pretty poor. So yeah, they're kind of isolated to their different neighborhoods, but they create Appalachian neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. They have Appalachian communities. It's kind of like these small kind of ghettos in these industrial hubs. And so they were smart enough to realize, oh my gosh, when I move north, I have a community waiting for me, which kind of continues and encourages one of the biggest internal migrations the United States has ever seen. I mean, Dwight Yoakam memorializes the migration in his song Read and Write in Route 23. And Route 23 is the road that would take the Appalachians north to these industrial hubs.
I'm going to speak early on this and say you're full of so much interesting information that you should consider writing a book.
Oh gosh. I just don't think the world needs a book from a Southern California kid on Appalachia.
It's you've actually been there. It's got a better claim than all the leftists that want to write about it.
I guess, and I think there's a way to do it right. I would encourage people to read Richard Drake's History of Appalachia. It's a great text, and it addresses exactly what I just talked about. Like, this Appalachia is a myth narrative. He's let me talk about Coogee society. Like, this is clearly a not totally homogenous, but it is a common cultural identity. I think that book is really good. A man by the name of Eller has a book called Uneven Ground. Uneven Ground. The subtitle is Appalachia since 1945. And that is where I don't think he might be doing it intentionally, he might not, but it's a very dry historical read and you have to work hard to get through it. It's full of really interesting anecdotes that kind of keep you involved when it's talking about the politics of how the Appalachian Regional Commission came about and all that stuff. But I think there he presents in very clear terms just the way the text reads, this capital P progressive narrative of Appalachia in the post-war period, right?
Right.
Because it's just talking about different leftist groups or NGOs and development programs and how aid's going to be distributed and this, that, and the other thing. And to be honest, it's not all bad news. Appalachia in 1960, there's 420 counties in Appalachia. In 1960, 220 of them were considered incredibly economically distressed. Now that number's down to 90, which is a good thing, of course. But it's not for, in my opinion, it's not for different aid distribution mechanisms, right? I mean, I heard this from the guys who were there and I talked to. I mean, in the piece, I talk about this eclectic band of hillbillies that I spent time working on a warehouse with. One of them a trucker, one of them a logger, one of them a miner, another trucker, and then one who migrated north to work at a Ford plant outside of Detroit. So hit all the major bases of how these hillbillies, self-identified hillbillies, have lived their lives as boomers who came up in Appalachia. And it's not for necessarily aid distribution mechanisms. It's for people who went away and worked really good paying jobs relative to what was left at home and came back and started charities, right? All these guys that I was working on this warehouse with were affiliated with a charity called Hope in the Hills. And the warehouse we were working on was where they keep all of their food and all of their dry goods and all of their, diapers and baby formula that they can distribute to the community. So it's people like that. And it's people like Kevin Rogers, who really, I think, have materially improved the lives of Appalachians, and is the reason why, even though things are still really difficult in Appalachia, you've seen that decline over the years of just incredibly distressed communities,
Yeah.
And 90 counties out of 420 is still a pretty mind-boggling number.
Right. Yeah, that's super fascinating. We're going to go now to our members only section. As a reminder, there are two different tiers for this. You can be a truther or a statesman.
I am neither.
He is neither. He should sign up for that, and we're going to talk about that after. But you should sign up for it. It's a great way to support what is hopefully your favorite podcast. You can do that on YouTube. You get to see my beautiful mug, Bradley's beautiful mug. But anyway, you get to have a great time and support your favorite show. So you can do that on our YouTube page. I believe it's youtube.com/@ American Moment. So you can go and check that out. And during this members only section, we're going to be talking about Bradley's doomsday predictions, and we're going to be talking about the great sport of Formula One. Quick, Sarab's gone. We're talking about sports. So we will go now to the members only section.
If you're listening to this, you're almost certainly a highly sophisticated news consumer, but even the most dogged of DC politicos need a news aggregator to help them out. We're big fans of Upward News here at American Moment. Ari David has actually been a previous guest on this show. We highly recommend you check out that episode. But Upward.news is a way that our team keeps in touch with all of the crazy news stories going on around the world. Your Twitter feed is not necessarily 100% reliable to get a proper cross-section of everything going on that matters. Upward News is a fantastic young media startup that is really putting together fantastic newsletters and social media content that helps people digest the news, especially if you're tired of being on the phone with your parents and explaining news stories to them multiple times a week because you're the politico in the family. I highly recommend encouraging them to follow Upward.news. They do a free 5-minute daily email that you can sign up for at readupward.com, or even better, www.ihatefakenews.com. It's time for a palate cleanse from politicos, punch bowls, and pucks. Try Upward News today. We highly recommend it. Ari's an incredibly smart patriot, and they're a new player on the block focused on cutting through the noise and delivering smart analysis. Please check them out.
Thank you for joining us again on another fantastic episode of Moment of Truth. Make sure to follow the American Conservative and Bradley on Twitter, or X as it is now called. I'm a spiritual boomer. I refuse to call it that. Make sure to go to AmericanMoment.org to see all the cool things that we're up to. As a reminder, you can sign up for our membership program on our YouTube page. Please leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. 5 stars only, please. Leave nice comments. It really does help. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is americanmoment.org.